Well, hello. Welcome once again to another edition of Pray on This. I'm your host, John Pray. Hit the like button, subscribe, turn on notifications, or join me on Rumble. Today we're going to talk about misleading headlines and polls, misinformation. Yesterday I had the privilege of watching our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau lecture us on the difference between misinformation and disinformation. He, after all, is special because he studied English Lit, unlike most journalists and opinion columnists who studied political science, because words matter. I guess he was trying to go back to his roots as a teacher, and that I don't matter at all because I studied history, psychology, and business. He went on about the subject while never answering the original question, which was about his Bill C-11, commonly referred to as the Internet Censorship Law. The question was, who decides what misinformation and disinformation actually is? However, that's not actually the subject of the piece today. No, it's how this is used against us. How many times have we seen a statement like this? The two SLGBTQQAI plus community says this. Or women believe this. Asian Canadians are supporting, African Canadians feel this way, or Indigenous people support the following measure. That very concept is just unbelievable. Women, all of them, 50% of the population all believe one thing? You can't actually believe that, do you? You know it's a complete lie. I'll give you an example. Pierre Poilievre has the male vote, but women do not support him. Really? All women? All 20 million Canadian women, when our next election comes, are not going to vote for the Conservative Party of Canada because they don't like Pierre? Yet, not to be exposed as liars or trying to sway your opinion to what the editorial position of the paper, blog, or newspaper actually is and what they want you to believe, they will then give you the actual numbers. 39% of women are intending to vote Liberal, 32% Conservative Party of Canada, 18% NDP, 4% are supporting other parties, and 6% are undecided. That's a far cry from all women. However, the headline, or the way the story was introduced, was done so to mislead the consumer of the media. Asian Canadians. Now, this is unbelievable as a group. I have watched media, politicians, and academics all my life try to block anybody from Asia into a singular group. Now, I have several friends who are Asian descent. My friends Farouk and Hardeep are Asian. Then again, so is Juan Carlo and his wife Jasmine. My wife and I also have friends named Wu and Lee, as well as Chotan and Kamiko. They are all from Asia. Every single one of them is an immigrant to this country. Every single one of them has become a Canadian citizen. However, Farouk's from Pakistan, Hardeep from India. Juan Carlo and Jasmine come from the Philippines. Wu and Lee are Chinese. And Chotan and Kamiko are Japanese. Believe me, as Canadians, they agree on some things and vehemently disagree on other things. However, they'll still say, well, Asian Canadians. I have friends who, though, are all from Asia, but come from many different cultures. However, in the diversity and inclusion times that we live in, we have to lump them all together as a group, even though the reality is very different. One of the biggest lies is African Canadians. Now, we are calling everyone who has a skin tone that we used to, and most of us still do, including black people, identify as black. Yet in Canada, where black men and black women make up 3% of our population, most do not come from Africa. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of black Canadians, who, yes, at one time originally came from Africa, possibly hundreds of years ago, are not actually African. They're of Caribbean descent, or they have come from the United States of America. I want you to remember, Elon Musk is an African Canadian, but he has white skin. He holds Canadian, U.S., and South African citizenship, and was mostly raised in South Africa. So, with the statement African Canadian is misinformation. It's also quite clear that people from Egypt, Libya, and other North African countries most certainly come from Africa, but they would not consider themselves to be black. Let's talk about Indigenous Canadians. I live in a county that shares a border with the Six Nations of the Grand, the Iroquois people. And yes, although I am almost totally of European descent on both sides, my mother's brothers, my uncles, both married Indigenous women. One married a woman from the Six Nations, the other a lady from the territory north of Parry Sound, the Ojibwe people. So I have Indigenous cousins who are my family by blood and marriage. I can say that the Indigenous people of Canada are not one people. The concerns of my cousins are very different on many subjects, especially when they concern the issues that affect the one's band council versus the other's band council. As I am sure that the members of this community in Atlantic Canada have very different issues that they champion versus those in Quebec or those in Western provinces, those on the Pacific coast, and those who live in the extreme north. Their opinions are very wide and varied, but our politicians, media, and the chattering classes love to say that this is what the Indigenous people of Canada want. Yet, what an Indigenous man who lives in Ohsweken, Ontario, who's a member of the Six Nations of the Grand, is very different than a man who is either Plains Cree or Chippewan who lives in the Fort McMurray area of Alberta. For that matter, calling me white, a middle aged cis white male, that doesn't describe me at all. I did one of those DNA tests to find out what my makeup is. Yes, the two largest parts of me are German and English, yet I have French, Norse, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, and very little bits of Spanish and Indigenous DNA, as I suspect many white people do. Finally, the last group that I mentioned above, the LGBT community. I'm sorry, not trying to offend, it's just that's getting to be an incredibly long acronym. I put community in quotes, as from my observations, they're not a community at all. If we want to push it, we could say that in the 70s through the early 2000s in Canada, the L's and the G's of the group, lesbians and gays, had a pretty united front and a pretty clear fight for rights. The rights to be accepted, to have the same rights in their relationships of heterosexual couples, that of shared medical benefits, shared property rights, parental rights, and the right to be married, which have all been achieved, and fantastic that they have. I believe our country is better for it. Now, I know some will say, I can't even have an opinion on this. You're a straight white man. You should shut up. You don't have a dog in this fight. However, I do have a dog in this fight. My daughter is a member of this group. She's a lesbian. I have a lifelong friend who came out at 32 as being gay. I have other friends who identify as bisexual. I know a few transgenders. As for the rest, well, a lot of those letters confuse me and I'm not exactly sure what they are, especially the plus sign. And every day something new gets added. However, what I do know is this: my daughter cares about herself, her partner, her friends, which are almost all women and almost all lesbian. My friend, he cares about himself, his partner, and his friends, which are also almost mostly gay men. That's his concern. From talking with my friends and my daughter, you can see there really isn't a community at all. It's the media, the academic, and worst of all, the politicians who push everybody who has a different sexual orientation into a group, a box. Why do they do this, you ask? Well, it's simple. It gives them a way to play wedge issue politics, to turn Canadians against each other. It's not done to unify us as a people, as Canadians, but to separate us by age group, social status, economic status, racial groups, religious groups, and sexual orientation. I'm going to give you an example of how it works. Take the current Liberal government. Now, we all know that Justin Trudeau and his minions hate the oil and gas industry. However, if you want to stop a project and not look like it's you that's stopping that project, well, you say, well, the Indigenous people of Canada are against this project. So you're going to use the group to stop what you actually really want stopped. You want to get votes from a certain community? You put in place a policy that says this racial group was historically discriminated against. So we're going to make it easier for these racialized Canadians to get a job or get that spot in university above everybody else. Or you promote very, very tiny groups like the transgender community, but then you wrap it in a bigger group where you go to 2S LGBTQQAI plus and say, oh, look at this massive group. They have historically been oppressed, so we must do this. They even do it this way. We have to tax the rich so we can make the lives of the poor better. But then they refuse to define what the rich is. Is that someone making $85, $90, $100,000 a year? That's above the Canadian average. When you look at it, you'll look at me and say, that doesn't make sense. Oh, yes, it does make sense. The majority of Canadians are still of European descent, so we are the oppressor group. But most people think of ourselves as a good, moral person. So when Justin Trudeau tells you, if you support that pipeline, you're a bad person because you hate Indigenous Canadians. You don't want diversity hirings? That's because you're a bigot and a racist, and you want to continue the systemic racist policies that you benefit from. You think drag shows are just for adults and that children shouldn't see that? You hate the LGBT community. You're against taxing the rich? Well, that's just because you yourself are rich and greedy, and that makes you a bad person because you don't want to help the poor. If you try to rise above it, stand with friends and family who are people of color, or a lesbian, or gay, well, you're just doing that to cover for your internal racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, or the systemic oppression which your group has placed on the minority. It's done so we're all so busy turning on each other that we don't see what their real goal is: control. Control of how we think, what we do, how we live our lives. And God forbid, a voice rises from the wilderness that says, I don't care about the color of your skin, the heritage of your genetic makeup, how much money you make, or if you're in a couple that's Adam and Eve, Adam and Steve, or Amber and Eve. We are all individuals. We are all worthy of time, space, and personal thoughts because we are all Canadians. My word, if we had a leader like that, one who cared that every Canadian mattered, that concentrated on education and employment by merit, and had the attitude that the rising tide of a strong Canadian economy, which is growing at quick pace, that the Canadian dream of home ownership and of having your children have a better life than what you did, that the Canadian individual is paramount and that the rights of the individuals trumps the right of the group, that would cause the tide to rise, and that all 40 million Canadian boats would rise with that rising tide. My word, what a country we would have. So my advice when the next election comes is this. When certain politicians put us in groups and they want to talk to you about a woman's right to choose or same-sex marriage and that they are the only ones who will protect it, or they are the only ones that care about poor Canadians, only they care about Canadian workers, versus this as a choice. I want a strong Canadian economy. I want strong Canadian innovation. I want to use simple language. I believe in the common Canadian people, and that leader doesn't need to put a label on every single person. You're a Canadian. You're not an LGBT Canadian, an Indigenous Canadian, an Asian Canadian, African Canadian. You're not a female Canadian. You're not a person of color and cares not about the size of your wallet, but the content of your character. Wouldn't that be amazing? Remember the leader or leaders who identify you by a group label, that you are this before you are a husband or a wife, a sister or a brother, a mother or a father, a professional, a doctor, a lawyer, a tradesperson, a laborer. They are all just trying to divide, confuse, and control you, and will do so with lies that they care about you. They don't. They want to use you and make you afraid of everyone who is different than you, so they can control you, get your vote, and they either get or maintain power. I know the other leader sounds scary. He doesn't sound very caring. He says things that are so different to the Trudeau or the Singhs. That's because he believes in you as a person. He doesn't care about the group that you belong to. The only group he cares that you're part of are these two groups. He cares that you're a Canadian and that you're a human being. We've just had 8 years of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau playing wedge issue identity politics, telling each group you're special, but you are here in this bad place because of him or her or them. I'm going to fix that for you. I will bring equality of outcome so everything is fair. I will make everything equitable, and I will punish those who have this because they are part of that group that oppressed you. It's not your fault. It's not the bad decisions you made. It's because of them. Well, here we are in 2023 in our more perfectly equitable country that Justin Trudeau has changed and ruled over for the last 8 years. How's your life today compared to 2015? If you're better off, great. But believe me, you are part of a very small minority. In my 54 years on this planet, this is what I have discovered to be the truth. Whenever I have an even playing field and I make good decisions, work hard, and proceed within my moral code, success has always been the result. Even when the playing field is even, if I make bad choices, I've been lazy, or I do things outside my moral code, I have always failed. When the playing field has been stacked so that some get no advantage, some get a few advantages, and some get every advantage, we all fail. So rise above being put in a box. Don't think it has to be this way because you belong to this group. And when you see that the deck is stacked either for you or against you, that's when you need to speak out, especially when it's stacked for you, because that is a real social injustice. Remember, when the game is played fair and on the level, as one succeeds, we all succeed, and all of our boats will be raised in that rising tide. This is something we all need to remember and think about the next time we need to put an X beside someone's name. That, as always, is pray on this.